My name is Emma Correa, McAllister class of 2020, and I am a geography and French double major. The title of my French capstone project is Des armes à feu au champ classique, la manifestation culturelle en Corse après une lutte multiséculaire contre la perception erronée et la domination des forces extérieures, which translates to From Firearms to Classical Chants, Cultural Protest in Corsica after a multi-century struggle against misperception and the domination of outside forces. Occupied for centuries by a large number of European powers, the island of Corsica and its inhabitants have been characterized throughout its history as Roman, Genoese, Italian, Greek, English, and French over the course of just over 2,000 years of inhabitants. However, over the course of these centuries of occupation, despite the presence of occupiers, a distinct Corsican culture, language, and identity have developed. And today, that identity and that language and that culture in Corsica are on the verge of disappearance. Concern for the loss of this culture and language has been on the minds of Corsicans for many, many years, and a highly publicized nationalist movement erupted in response to this threat of cultural extinction in the wake of World War II. This movement, however, has been hotly ridiculed and has been made out to be incredibly violent and incredibly unnecessary by the mainstream French media. In my capstone, I assert that despite legitimate issues with the highly publicized wing of the Corsican nationalist movement, another wing of the movement exists that is much more mainstream and less radical, and this wing of the movement is being largely ignored as the result of deep-rooted French misconceptions and prejudice against the island. As a part of this analysis, I attempt to trace French stereotypes about the island back to their source, which I believe theoretically to be 18th century French Romantic literature, beginning with the novel Colomba by Prosper Mérimée, in which Mérimée talks about the island as if it is worlds away from France and describes the way of life on the island as isolated, primitive, and relatively full of endemic violence. These ideas became widespread, used by other authors such as Guy de Maupassant, and were reprinted in travel guides, magazines, newspapers, and academic works about the island for the next several centuries. After tracing French stereotypes about the island back to what I believe to be their textual source, I assess recent attempts to shift the Corsican nationalist movement from explicitly cultural or explicitly political to something more cultural in nature. These attempts have taken various forms, from efforts to increase awareness of Corsican culture on the mainland, to advocating for UN funding to save the dying Corsican language and art forms such as classical chants. In addition, I find that in the past 10 years, the past 5 years especially, this peaceful and largely cultural movement has begun to politicize and gain some traction in the regional parliament, indicating a new awareness of Corsican identity and the measures that need to be taken in order to prevent it from dying out. Thank you for listening, and I hope you consider majoring in French.
Good afternoon. I would like to present my honors thesis, Les Gilets jaunes et l'inégalité économique en France, une image de la France de 2010 à 2020. My thesis statement was that the source of the current economic, social, and political problems facing France is economic inequality, which has been steadily rising for the past 40 years. The Gilets jaunes, a protest movement that started in response to the proposed increase on the diesel tax in 2018, is just one reaction to the increasing inequality seen in France. Some supporting claims are that economic inequality plays an important role in social mobility, economic growth, and overall societal progress. Increased economic inequality is the natural result of the wealth accumulation we have seen globally. Without government intervention in the form of taxes and government expenditures, economic inequality will continue to rise. This will lead to a more divided society and more movements like the Gilets jaunes. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Sophia Hayes. I am a senior at Macalester College and I am a French and Francophone Studies and International Studies double major. I wanted to share with you today a little bit about the senior capstone that I wrote for my French major. The topic is women's rights during the French Revolution and was really inspired by a couple of different classes that I've taken during my 4 years with the Macalester French Department, including classes on 18th century French literature and women's identities in Paris in the 18th century. So, my paper begins by providing a little bit of background on what it meant to be a woman and a female citizen in France in the early 1790s, right at the onset of the revolution. I look at how society was structured and how a gender hierarchy was being established alongside the First Republic, because women were really only valued for their roles as mothers and homemakers. They were the ones who were going to raise the next generation of French patriots. So, despite numerous economic and political contributions to the revolution, were really only being valued for their reproductive abilities and were kind of at the bottom of the social hierarchy versus men at the top. Now, using this kind of gendered lens, I read a 1793 play called L'Époux républicain by Maureen de Pompigny that looks at kind of the characterizations and identities of women in the early 1790s. The play really focuses on two main characters, Melise and Franklin, who are married, and Melise plots to escape from France. Franklin finds out that she's going to leave and reports her as a traitor and basically just someone who's very unpatriotic to the French government. And so, by looking at this play, which was really a representation of popular culture in the 1790s, I see how women's political identities were constructed and relayed to the general public, and how the construction of the First Republic, which is often heralded as the first democratic experiment in the modern world, was really based on the oppression of women who were only being valued for their reproductive abilities. So I hope this gave you a little short look at what I've been working on this semester, and I hope you'll reach out to the Macalester French Department if you have any questions about a senior capstone or classes or anything else, and that we see you at Macalester soon. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Mattea, and I am presenting on my project. It is titled Les traumatismes du passé, l'esprit d'aujourd'hui, l'histoire naturelle et le traumatisme dans les œuvres de Ken Bugul et Scholastique Mukasanga, or in English, Traumas of the Past, Spirits of Today, the Supernatural and Trauma in the Works of Ken Bugul and Scholastique Mukasanga. So the two novels that I analyzed are De l'autre côté du regard by Ken Bugul, who's an author from Senegal, and La femme aux pieds nus by Scholastique Mukasanga, who is from Rwanda. Bugul addresses her family history and her fraught relationship with her mother, while Mukasanga documents culture and community in Rwanda in the years preceding the Rwandan genocide and her mother's death. So the themes that I were interested in were autobiography, family history, education and tradition, and the supernatural. And I was particularly interested in exploring the relationship between trauma and the supernatural in these two works. So my argument is that the supernatural gives a voice to the dead, thus allowing the protagonists to reconcile these sources of tension and address their feelings of guilt. And the tension that I'm talking about is tension which exists in their families, as well as tension between conceptions of education and progress and tradition in both of the novels. So some of the supporting claims I use, I analyze autobiography in both of the works. In Ken Bugul's work, there is a quest for identity, and she feels lost after her mother's abandonment, which I analyze. And I argue that Mukasonga's work is an homage to her mother and her community, which was destroyed by the genocide. To reconcile this destruction, there's the mother's voice in the work of Ken Bugul, which allows Bugul to communicate with her mother, as well as the presence of the spirits of the dead in Mukasonga's work. In Mukasonga's work, the supernatural is present but not as visible, so I supplement my analysis with a novel called L'Homme di Mana by Veronique Tadjot, which functions to give a voice to the victims of the genocide, and also also addresses issues of guilt for the survivors. So through my analysis of these elements, I was able to link the themes of trauma and the supernatural in De l'autre côté du regard by Ken Bugul and La Femme aux pieds nus by Scholastique Mukasonga. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Julia Hirsch, and I will be presenting my French honors thesis called Cameroon is Bilingual, but Cameroonians are not bilingual: the importance of the translation of Nyangwa Bantu in a multilingual country. During the spring of my junior year, I studied abroad in Cameroon, and I went to this kingdom called Batufam in the West region. And I met the king of Batufam and learned that he was writing a book and that he would like someone English speaking to translate it for him. And as I speak a lot of French and a lot of English, I thought, why not take this opportunity and help translate his book? So for my honors thesis, what I did was I chose 2 chapters of this book, which is an ongoing project, and translated them from French to English. And the book is basically just about Batufam's culture and history and his kind of personal view on it as their king. And so after doing the translation, I then wrote a critical essay where I was examining what is the importance of this translation worldwide and what role do I play in this as the translator. So in my paper, I do a close examination of the situation of bilingualism in Cameroon, which is extremely important in the role of translation in the country. So Cameroon is called bilingual because it has an English-speaking, 2 English-speaking regions and 8 French-speaking regions. But it's not truly bilingual because the French regions are much more populated, and they are the ones in control of the government, so that puts the English speakers as a minority status. So they kind of really have to adapt to speaking French, but the Francophones don't have to adapt to speaking English. So there's more of a need for translation because not every person at the individual level is bilingual. So because of this lack of true bilingualism, as I call it, in Cameroon, it is not necessarily true that translation can help increase the level of bilingualism for people around the country, but more that it could potentially unite people by sharing the same information in their respective languages. So that is why I'm arguing that this book is important within Cameroon. And I also believe that it's very important worldwide as well in kind of creating an understanding of tradition and modernity and how they interact and influence each other in Cameroon, as is really shown in the Batufam culture and in this book. So I just want to conclude with, why is this project important? I believe that it's really important to kind of create a bridge between cultures, and I, as an American who visited Batufam, which doesn't have a lot of American visitors, am hoping to kind of be a role in creating this bridge. And in addition to my French major, I also am an anthropology major, so this gives me kind of a lens for how to understand cultures different from my own. But because of my background, there are certain approaches that I took to doing this translation, and that leaves a lot of space for other future translators to take different approaches to this same text in the future. And also, I'm just doing one case study with one text, but many of these same kinds of messages may be present in many other kinds of books and literature and memoirs. So this is just a case study for why translation of different African texts are so important to share worldwide. Thank you so much for listening to my brief description of my capstone, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you.